The stars burned cold and distant as High Chancellor Vexter stared at the tactical display before him, a small cluster of 5 systems marked in pale blue against the darkness of unexplored space. These were the human territories, barely worth noticing on the grand map of the Krythian Empire that stretched across 3,000 star systems and encompassed 47 different species. They refused? Vexter's voice carried the sharp edge of disbelief that made his subordinates shift uncomfortably in their positions. Commander Ralph nodded, his 4 eyes blinking in nervous sequence. Yes, High Chancellor. The humans sent a formal diplomatic response, declining our generous offer of protection and tribute. The council chamber fell silent, except for the hum of the starship's engines, a sound so constant that most barely noticed it anymore. But in that moment, every officer present became acutely aware of the tension filling the air. Vexter's claws tapped against the armrest of his command throne, each click echoing like a countdown. How long have these primitives been in space? 200 cycles, Chancellor. They have colonized only 5 systems and maintain a modest fleet of perhaps 300 vessels. 300. Vexter's laugh was harsh and bitter, like metal scraping against stone. The Krythian Empire commanded over 50,000 warships, each one a masterpiece of destruction, refined over millennia of conquest. These humans, with their handful of colonies, dared to refuse the greatest empire in galactic history. What is their population across all systems? Vexter demanded. Rolf checked his datapad quickly. Approximately 12 billion, spread across 22 colonies. Their largest settlement is called New Perth, housing nearly 2 million citizens. New Perth. Vexter rose from his throne, towering over the assembled officers. Send the 9th Fleet. Destroy it completely. Leave no structure standing, no ship operational. These primitives need to understand what it means to defy the Krythian Empire. The order went out within minutes, traveling faster than light across the vast distances between stars in the colony of New Perth. Families gathered for evening meals, children played in the artificial gravity parks, and workers finished their shifts in the orbital factories. Completely unaware that death was racing toward them, Admiral Sarah Chun sat in her office aboard the U.S. Defiance, reviewing supply manifests and crew rotations, the mundane work of peacetime military service that somehow always expanded to fill whatever time she had available. Her dark eyes scanned the reports with practiced efficiency, noting the decreased response times in gamma shift and making a mental note to discuss it with Commander Harrison. The priority alert klaxon shattered her concentration. Like a hammer through glass, all hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Unknown hostile fleet detected at system edge. Estimated arrival New Perth orbit, 42 minutes. Sarah was running before the announcement finished, her mind already shifting into combat mode. Corridors blurred past as she sprinted toward the bridge, other crew members materializing from doorways and side passages, all heading to their posts with the desperate speed of those who knew time was their enemy. Report. She barked as she burst onto the bridge, sliding into her command chair while her hands flew across the control panels. 36 capital ships, Admiral. Configuration matches Krythian Empire standard battle formation. They're not responding to hails. Lieutenant Morrison's voice cracked slightly on the last word. 36 capital ships against New Perth's defensive fleet of 8 cruisers and 14 frigates. The mathematics of destruction were brutally simple. Sound colony evacuation. Get every transport into space. Contact all civilian vessels and authorize emergency departure protocols. Sarah's voice remained steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The next 40 minutes passed in a blur of desperate activity. Transports launched carrying as many civilians as could be crammed aboard. Children crying as parents pressed them into the arms of strangers. Elderly citizens helped onto ships by neighbors they'd known for decades. The Krythian fleet arrived with terrible precision. Their ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Weapons already charging. Targeting solutions already calculated. Sarah's fleet moved to intercept. Their smaller vessels darting between the massive Krythian dreadnoughts. Like wolves harrying bears, but wolves could not stop bears. Only delay them. New Perth defense grid is firing. Morrison reported, but everyone could see the futility orbital defense platforms that had been designed to handle pirates and raiders-faced warships. Built to crack planets, the Krythian bombardment lasted 17 minutes. That was all the time required to reduce a thriving colony of 2 million souls into a radioactive debris. Sarah watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the world below died in nuclear fire, watched as entire city blocks vanished in expanding spheres of plasma, as the atmosphere itself began to burn, as everything humanity had built over 50 years of patient work dissolved into ash and memory. Casualty estimates, she began, but Morrison shook his head. Unable to speak. Later reports would establish the number. 50,000 civilians had escaped on the transports. Nearly 2 million had not. The Krythian fleet departed as efficiently as it had arrived, leaving only silence and ruin behind. No demands, no communication. Just demonstration of overwhelming power. 3 days later, representatives from all 5 human colonies gathered via quantum communication. The United Earth Systems Council had been a loose governing body before, more coordinator than government, but grief and rage had transformed it into something harder. Something with teeth. Marcus Webb stood at attention in the military section of the council chamber. His marine dress uniform crisp despite having been packed in an emergency deployment bag for the rapid journey to Alpha Centauri. He'd lost family on New Perth, cousins he'd grown up with, and the fury in his chest burned hotter than any star. The motion is called. Council President Okonkwo's voice rang out clear and firm. The United Earth Systems hereby declares a state of total war against the Krythian Empire and all associated territories. All those in favor? The vote was unanimous. The declaration went out across all human channels, broadcast on every frequency, transmitted to every known species in the galaxy. Humanity, small and weak and primitive by every measure the galaxy used, had just declared war on an empire that had conquered half the known galaxy in the Krythian council chambers. Vexter read the human declaration and laughed. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Sharp and cruel. "Congratulations, primitives," he said to the empty air, knowing the message would be recorded and transmitted. "You have just declared war on the deadliest species in the galaxy." But in the back of his mind, in a place he did not acknowledge even to himself, a small voice whispered a question. What if he was wrong about which species the title belonged to? The galaxy would have its answer soon enough. 6 weeks after New Perth burned, the Krythian Third Fleet arrived at Proxima Station expecting another easy victory. What they found instead would change their understanding of warfare. Forever Commander Ralph reviewed the tactical display with growing confidence. Proxima Station hung in space like a metal flower, its defensive platforms arranged in the standard configuration that every species in the galaxy used. Predictable and easily countered. "Deploy assault wings Alpha through Gamma," he ordered calmly. "Target their power generation nodes first, then communications." Standard suppression doctrine. The Krythian ships moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons charging with the distinctive whine that had preceded the fall of 100 worlds. Then, everything went wrong. The human defensive platforms didn't fire from their fixed positions as expected. Instead, they detached from the station entirely, using maneuvering thrusters to create mobile firing positions that broke every tactical model in the Krythian database. Impossible. Ralph's second officer gasped. Those platforms don't have engines. Our intelligence clearly stated. Humans welded engines to them. The sensor operator interrupted. They're using civilian transport thrusters. They mounted them in the last 6 weeks. But that was just the beginning. The human fleet that emerged from behind. Proxima Station fought like nothing Ralph had ever encountered in 40 years of military service at Krytia. Doctrine emphasized measured engagement, calculated risk, and preservation of valuable military assets. Human doctrine appeared to be hit them with everything and figure out the rest later. The UES vengeful spirit took a direct hit that would have forced any sensible commander to withdraw for repairs. Instead, her captain ordered emergency power to weapons and rammed a Krytia cruiser at full thrust. Her crew abandoning ship at the last second in escape pods while the ship itself became a kinetic missile. They're insane, Ralph shouted, watching 3 more human vessels execute similar maneuvers. They're destroying their own ships. Admiral Sarah Chun listened to the cum chatter from her position aboard the Defiance. A cold smile on her lips. The Krytians were learning what humanity had known for centuries. Sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to lose everything. All wings. Execute pattern Thermopylae. She ordered calmly. The Krytian fleet suddenly found itself surrounded by human fighters, whose pilots flew with a recklessness that defied survival instinct. They dodged through friendly fire, pulled maneuvers that generated G-forces that should have killed them, and when their weapons ran dry, some actually tried to ram enemy fighters in a final act of defiance on the ground level of Proxima Station. Marcus Webb led his Marine battalion through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting. The Krytians had managed to land boarding parties, confident that their superior size and strength would carry the day in close combat. They had never fought humans before. The first Krytian shock trooper that rounded the corner stood nearly 3 meters tall, armed with plasma rifles and protected by armor that could stop anti-vehicle rounds. It died to a grenade thrown by a Marine who had been a high school baseball pitcher before the war. Contact left. Fire, fire, fire. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos as his Marines engaged the enemy with a ferocity that bordered on ferocidal. Krytians had evolved on a garden world where predators were rare and conflict was. Ritualized humans had evolved on a death world where every day was a struggle against nature itself, where persistence hunting meant chasing prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. That difference showed now Krytian soldiers fought with discipline and training, but human Marines fought with something deeper, something primal. Marcus cornered a wounded Krytian in a maintenance bay and saw the fear in its multiple eyes. This was new for them. He realized this terror of a smaller species that refused to acknowledge it should lose. Tell your commanders, Marcus said quietly, his rifle trained on the alien's center mass. Tell them that humans remember New Perth. Tell them we're coming. He let the alien live to carry the message above the station. The battle raged for 18 hours straight. Krytian crews rotated shifts, following standard doctrine that emphasized crew rest and efficiency. Human crews didn't rotate. They stayed at their posts for the entire battle, sustained by stimulants and sheer determination, pushing themselves beyond what biology should allow. When the Krytian Third Fleet finally withdrew, they had lost 30% of their ships. Proxima Station had lost 60% of its defenders, but the station still stood, damaged but defiant. The reports that reached High Chancellor Vexler painted a disturbing picture. These humans didn't fight like any species he knew. They have no sense of self-preservation. One commander wrote, "They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation. Retreat is not in their tactical vocabulary." Another report was even more alarming. Human vessels continued fighting with critical damage that should have forced surrender. One ship fought for 12 minutes after losing all life support. Crew died at their posts rather than abandon their positions. Vexter read the reports with growing unease, but he pushed the feeling aside. So the humans were fierce fighters, more desperate than expected. The Empire had faced desperate species before and crushed them all. Superior numbers and technology would prevail as they always did. He ordered 3 more fleets toward human space in the human colonies. The survivors of Proxima Station were hailed as heroes, but Sarah Chun felt no triumph as she walked through the damaged corridors of the Defiance. Past the empty stations where crew members would never return, Admiral Lieutenant Morrison approached hesitantly. Intelligence reports that the Krythians are calling us the mad species. They're spreading reports that we're too irrational to follow normal warfare conventions. Good. Sarah replied flatly. Let them be afraid. Let them wonder what we'll do next. Fear is a weapon, and we'll use every weapon we have. But privately, she wondered how long humanity could sustain this level of intensity. The Krythians could replace losses from hundreds of worlds. While humanity had only 5 colonies and 12 billion people total, the mathematics still favored the Empire. But mathematics didn't account for human stubbornness. Didn't factor in the kind of determination that turned cargo haulers into warships and civilians into soldiers. Marcus Webb stood in the memorial hall they'd erected for the fallen, staring at the names scrolling past on holographic displays, thousands of names. Each one a person who had chosen to stand and fight. Rather than flee, we're going to make them regret New Perth, he whispered. To the empty hall, we're going to teach them why you don't pick fights with humans. Across the galaxy, in research stations and archives, other species began to investigate humanity's home world. What they found shocked them. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, a rating reserved for planets where survival required constant adaptation. Most intelligent species evolved on Class 3 to Class 6 worlds. Comfortable environments where nature was cooperative. Humans had evolved alongside predators that could run them down, weather that could freeze or cook them, disasters that could wipe out entire populations, and humans had survived it all through sheer determination and adaptability. A Vexian researcher published a paper that sent ripples through the scientific community. Humanity evolved not as apex predators, but as persistence hunters. They would chase prey for days, following wounded animals until exhaustion killed them. This is their primary hunting strategy, encoded into their very biology. The implications were terrifying. Humanity wasn't just fighting the Krythian Empire. They were hunting it with the same patient determination their ancestors had used to run down prey across Earth's ancient grasslands. The Krythians had declared war on a species that quite literally evolved to never give up. High Chancellor Vexter dismissed these reports as academic nonsense. But his subordinates began to whisper among themselves. What had they started? What kind of enemy had they awakened? 6 months into the war, Admiral Sarah Chun stood before a holographic display showing the Terminus Gate, a natural wormhole that connected human space to the resource-rich Outer Rim territories. If they take the gate, they cut us off from 30% of our supply lines, she said quietly to her assembled officers. We cannot let that happen. Commander Harrison frowned at the tactical projection. Admiral, intelligence estimates the Krythian force at 200 capital ships. We can muster maybe 20 cruisers and supporting craft. The numbers don't matter, Sarah interrupted, her voice hard as steel. We hold this position or we lose the war. Find me solutions, not problems. The next 72 hours saw humanity demonstrate what desperation and creativity could achieve when combined. Human engineers had been studying captured Krythian technology since the war began, not just analyzing it but actively reverse engineering and improving upon it. Now those improvements would be tested in the crucible of battle. The Krythian fleet arrived at the Terminus Gate in force, confident that sheer numbers would overwhelm any defense. What they encountered instead defied their understanding of possible human. Ships had been retrofitted with Krythian shield technology, but modified in ways that made Krythian engineers tear at their crests in frustration. Instead of constant protection, the shields pulsed in rapid cycles, creating windows where human weapons could fire out while still blocking incoming shots. Impossible timing. A Krythian weapons officer gasped. The coordination required would need reaction speeds no organic being possesses. They were half right. Human crews didn't coordinate the shields manually. They built AI systems to handle the microsecond timing, while human creativity designed the tactics the AI executed. But the real shock came when the first Krythian ship's life support systems failed without warning. Then another, and another, as a virus of human design spread through the fleet's environmental controls, causing failures that forced ships to fall back from the battle line. Biological warfare? Vexter's voice shook with rage when he received the reports. They're using disease as a weapon? His intelligence officer nodded grimly. Not against living beings, Chancellor, against ship systems. They've developed computer viruses that target our environmental processors. This was forbidden under the Galactic Conventions for 3,000 years. Humans never signed those conventions. Vexter realized with growing horror that humans were fighting without rules, using weapons and tactics that civilized species had agreed to ban, approaching warfare with a totality that the galaxy had forgotten at the Terminus Gate. Marcus Webb led his Marines in what would become known as the 72. Our Stan Krythian forces had managed to land on the gate's control station, intending to capture it intact and use it against humanity. Marcus's battalion was all that stood between them and success. Sir, we've been fighting for 48 hours straight, his second-in-command reported, exhaustion evident in every word. The men need rest. Marcus checked his ammunition count, running low, like everything else. Rest when we're dead, Lieutenant. Hold the line. The battle became a grinding horror of close-quarters combat in narrow corridors. Krythians had superior size and strength, but humans had something else. They had the ability to push past pain, past exhaustion, past every biological warning that screamed for them to stop. They had adapted to a world that required them to keep going when every instinct said to quit. Marcus himself fought for 72 hours with only brief moments of unconsciousness. When his body simply shut down, his Marines would later report that he woke from these collapses by himself, simply stood up, and continued fighting. The Krythians broke first, not because they were losing, but because they couldn't comprehend facing an enemy that refused to acknowledge when they should logically surrender. They're not rational beings. A Krythian commander reported, they fight past the point of survival. We killed their medical officer, and they kept fighting. We destroyed their communications, and they coordinated through hand signals. We cut their power, and they fought in the dark. For the first time in 3,000 years, Krythian soldiers experienced something their species had nearly forgotten: that fear of losing, but fear of an enemy so determined that death seemed preferable to facing them. Admiral Sarah Chun held the Terminus Gate for 3 weeks against overwhelming odds. When relief finally arrived, her fleet was reduced to 7 functional ships held together by emergency repairs and sheer determination, but the gate still belonged to humanity. The victory sent shockwaves through the galaxy, not because humanity had won, but because of how they'd won. A human fleet, outnumbered 10 to 1, had held a position through unconventional tactics, forbidden weapons, and a level of determination that bordered on the incomprehensible. Other species that the Krythian Empire had conquered began to pay attention. If these newcomers could bloody the Empire's nose, what did that mean for the established order? Vexter faced the Krythian High Council with reports he could barely believe. In 6 months, we have lost 342 capital ships, he reported. his voice carefully controlled. Human casualties are proportionally higher, but they continue to fight. Their colony populations have declined by 15%, yet recruitment actually increases. Every defeat makes them more determined. Council member Thexroll clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. What are your intelligence reports showing about human morale? That's the problem, Vexter admitted. Human morale is not decreasing. If anything, it's increasing. They're treating this war as, he paused, searching for the right word, as personal. Every soldier fights as if the war is their individual responsibility. Recommendation? Another council member asked. Vexter straightened, pride warring with pragmatism. We increase our commitment. Send 10 more battle fleets. Crush them before they can adapt further. But even as he spoke, he felt the first whisper of doubt. What if numbers weren't enough? What if they were fighting a species that simply couldn't be defeated by conventional means? In human space, scientists and engineers worked around the clock on new weapons and defenses. They developed ships that could be assembled in weeks rather than months. Trading elegance for brutal efficiency, they created missiles that could think for themselves, making decisions too fast for organic beings to counter. They weaponized everything from mining equipment to civilian transports, turning every resource into a tool of war, and most terrifyingly from the Krythian perspective. They developed the Berserker Protocol, a combat system that combined human determination with AI assistance, allowing soldiers to fight past normal human limits by having computers regulate their bodies while they focus purely on combat. The first test of Berserker Protocol came. During a boarding action, Krythian Marines watched in horror as a human soldier took damage that should have been fatal and kept fighting. Their bodies sustained by automated medical systems, while their mind focused only on destroying the enemy. They've turned themselves into machines. A Krythian combat analyst wrote, but worse, they're machines that hate us. Marcus Webb underwent the Berserker augmentation willingly when asked if he understood the risks of letting an AI regulate his biological functions during combat. He simply replied, I understand that we're fighting for our species' survival. Risks are irrelevant. The procedure gave him and his Marines the ability to fight for extended periods beyond human endurance, but it came at a cost. Some Marines never fully disconnected from the protocol. Their minds forever changed by the experience of becoming a living weapon. Others found they could disconnect but chose not to, preferring the clarity of computer-assisted combat to the messy uncertainty of normal human consciousness. Sarah Chan watched her species transform before her eyes. They were becoming something new, something adapted to the crucible of total war. Are we losing our humanity? Commander Harrison asked quietly one night. As they reviewed casualty reports, Sarah considered the question carefully. No, she finally said, we're discovering what humanity really means. It means we adapt. It means we survive. It means we protect our own at any cost. She didn't mention her private fear that the cost might be higher than anyone had calculated, that winning the war might mean becoming something they wouldn't recognize across the galaxy. The Krythian Empire began to fracture subject. Species whispered in the darkness about the humans who defied the mighty Krythians, and in the human colonies, a grim determination settled over the population. They would win this war. No matter what it took, the deadliest species in the galaxy was about to learn that title was up for debate. 2 years into the war, the galaxy began to understand that humanity had been fighting on multiple fronts from the very beginning. Military conflict was just the most visible in a secret facility beneath the surface of Titan. Commander Jessica Torres reviewed intelligence reports with a satisfaction that bordered on predatory. Her organization didn't exist in official records, had no formal name, and operated with a mandate that would have shocked the civilian population. The Verkai are ready, her analyst reported. 3 more cycles, and they'll initiate the uprising. Weapons caches are in place. Communication networks established. Leadership identified and trained. Jessica nodded, adding another pin to her holographic map. The Verkai were one of 47 species that the Krythian Empire had conquered over the centuries. Forced into servitude and stripped of autonomy, now they would be the first to break free. Humanity's diplomatic corps had been busy while the military fought. They'd sent secret envoys to every subject species in the Krythian Empire, carrying a simple message: help us defeat the Krythians, and we'll help you win your freedom. It was a promise that would have been laughable coming from any other species, but humanity had proven they could bloody the Empire's nose. And that made all the difference. How many species have committed to active resistance? Jessica asked. 12 have agreed to open rebellion when we give the signal. 20 more are providing intelligence. The rest are waiting to see if we can actually win. We will, Jessica said with absolute certainty. Because we're not just fighting a war. We're dismantling an empire from the inside out. The Vorkai uprising began on a Tuesday. Krythian occupation forces on Vorkai Prime woke to find their communications jammed, their supply depots sabotaged, and an armed resistance that seemed to materialize out of nowhere by the time Krythian reinforcements arrived. The Vorkai had seized control of 3 major cities and were broadcasting their declaration of independence across all frequencies. We are Vorkai. We are free. We stand with humanity against tyranny. The broadcast was in Vorkai, Krythian, and surprisingly fluent English, a detail that made Vexter slam his fist against his desk hard enough to crack the surface. The humans trained them. He snarled. How long have they been planning this? His intelligence officer pulled up timeline analysis. Based on communication patterns we've decoded, Chancellor, since the first month of the war. They've been recruiting subject species while we focused on military engagements. Vexter felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine fear. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to destroy the entire structure of Krythian power, and they were succeeding. Admiral Sarah Chun watched the reports of the Verkai uprising with grim satisfaction. This was the real war, the one that would determine outcomes. Military victories were important, but they were also temporary. You could win 1,000 battles and still lose the war if you didn't address the fundamental strategic situation. The Krythians built their empire on fear and overwhelming force. She told her staff, we're going to tear it down by offering something they never did hope. The Krythian response to the Verkai uprising was brutal and swift. Entire cities were bombarded from orbit as examples, but this backfired spectacularly. Humanity's diplomatic corps made sure every atrocity was recorded and broadcast across the galaxy within weeks. 5 more species rose in rebellion. The Krythian Empire suddenly faced insurgencies on multiple fronts. Marcus Webb led the first official human military operation in support of the rebellions. His enhanced Marine battalion deployed to Verkai Prime to train resistance fighters in human combat doctrines. Listen carefully, he told a group of Verkai recruits, their bioluminescent skin flickering with nervous energy. Krythians are bigger, stronger, better armed. But you have advantages they'll never understand. What advantages? A young Verkai asked skeptically. We have been slaves for 3 generations. Marcus smiled grimly. You know your world better than they do. You know which tunnels flood, which buildings have weak foundations, which routes their patrols follow. You know the faces of collaborators and the hearts of patriots. This is your home. Make them regret ever coming here. Over the next 6 months, Verkai resistance fighters became a nightmare for Krythian occupation forces. Ambushes struck from unexpected angles. Supply convoys disappeared without trace. Occupation administrators found themselves targeted in ways that defied detection. The Krythians responded by increasing security, which required pulling ships and soldiers from other fronts, which weakened their position against human military forces. Was exactly what humanity had planned in the depths of space between stars. Human scientists worked on projects that would have seemed like science fiction before the war. They developed faster-than-light communication that didn't rely on relay stations, giving human forces a coordination advantage. They created stealth ships that could slip through Krythian sensor networks, delivering special forces teams deep into enemy territory. They weaponized solar radiation, turning stars themselves into strategic assets. And in the greatest secret of all, they developed something they called Project Armstrong, a contingency plan that made even the humans who created it pause in moral uncertainty. Are we really prepared to do this? The lead scientist asked during a classified briefing. Sarah Chun, present as military liaison, didn't hesitate. If it means survival, yes. If it means protecting our species and every species that's allied with us, absolutely. The Krythians chose total war when they destroyed New Perth. We'll show them what total war really means. Project Armstrong remained dormant, a final card held in reserve, but its mere existence gave humanity's leadership a confidence that showed in every negotiation. Every battle plan, meanwhile, Marcus and his Marines conducted operations across a dozen worlds, training insurgents, assassinating Krythian officials, destroying infrastructure. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were agents of chaos, carefully directed to create maximum strategic impact with minimum resources. Sir, the Krythians have put a bounty on you, his lieutenant reported one day. 10 million credits, dead or alive. Marcus checked his equipment with practiced efficiency. Only 10 million? I'm insulted. We must be doing something wrong if I'm worth less than a mid-sized freighter. His team laughed, but the humor was dark. They all knew the risks, knew that every mission might be their last. What kept them going was the knowledge that they were winning, slowly, painfully, at terrible cost. But winning. The galaxy's understanding of warfare began to shift for millennia. Galactic conflict had been a matter of fleet movements and economic pressure. Civilized and restrained humanity reintroduced concepts that had been forgotten. Guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, strategic deception, total mobilization as Elvian military. Historian published a paper that sent ripples through academic circles. Humans don't fight wars. They fight campaigns of extinction. They view conflict not as a game with rules, but as a survival challenge where every tool is valid. The paper was meant as criticism, but humanity's enemies read it as confirmation of their worst fears. Vexter faced increasing pressure from the Krythian Council. The Empire bleeds from 1,000 cuts. Council member Thex Raw argued, every day we lose ships to human attacks. Every week, another subject species rebels. Our military is spread across 100 fronts. This is unsustainable. What do you suggest? Vexter demanded. That we surrender to primitives? I suggest we acknowledge reality. Dexral clicked his mandibles aggressively. These primitives have transformed galactic warfare in 2 years. They've turned our own subjects against us. They fight with weapons we abandoned as barbaric. They're winning. Vexter's response was to order the development of planet-killer weapons. If he couldn't defeat the humans conventionally, he would threaten their worlds directly by human intelligence, fed by sympathetic species throughout the Empire. Learned of the project within days, Sarah Chun called an emergency meeting of human leadership. The Krythians are developing weapons to destroy our colonies from orbit, she reported. Estimated completion time, 6 months. We need to accelerate our timeline. Timeline for what? Asked President Okonkosara, pulled up classified files. Timeline for everything. The Verkai uprising was just the beginning. We have 17 more species ready to rebel. We have deep cover agents in the Krythian High Command. We have Project Armstrong as our final guarantee. You're talking about bringing down the entire empire. Okonkwo said slowly. Yes, Sarah confirmed. Because that's the only way we survive. The Krythians will never stop trying to crush us. So we remove their ability to crush anyone ever again. The decision was made. Humanity would go all in across the galaxy. Human agents sent the signal rebellions erupted on. 23 worlds simultaneously. Human fleets launched coordinated strikes on Krythian logistics hubs, special forces teams sabotaged shipyards and research facilities, and most devastating of all, humanity released evidence of every Krythian atrocity committed over 3,000 years of conquest recordings, documents, survivor testimonies. The galaxy reeled from the revelations. Species that had thought themselves alone in suffering discovered they were part of a pattern. The Krythian Empire's moral authority, already damaged, collapsed entirely. 3 years into the war, Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UE's indomitable flagship of humanity's combined fleet and stared at the planet rotating slowly on her view screen. Krytia Prime, homeworld of the Empire that had started this war. All fleets report ready. Admiral, Commander Harrison said quietly. 273 human vessels, plus another 400 ships from allied species. This is everyone we have. Sarah nodded slowly, aware that this moment would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Send the final transmission to High Chancellor Vexter. Tell him we're here to accept his surrender. On the surface of Krytia Prime, Vexter read the human message with shaking hands, not from fear, he told himself, but from rage. They dare? He whispered. They dare come to our homeworld and demand surrender? His council chamber was half empty. 30% of the council had fled or been killed in the uprisings that now consumed the empire. Another 20% had sided with reform factions that advocated peace. Chancellor, his military advisor began carefully. Our defensive fleet is outnumbered. The rebellions have cut us off from reinforcements. Perhaps negotiation? No. Vexter's voice cracked like thunder. I will not surrender to primitives. Activate the planet killer weapons. If we fall, we take them with us. The order went out. Hidden weapons platforms across Krytia Prime powered up. Massive devices designed to crack planets like eggs. Sarah received the report within minutes. Weapon signatures detected. They're targeting New Terra, Alpha Centauri, and Proxima. Estimated time to firing? 18 minutes. Sarah felt the weight of billions of lives pressing down on her shoulders. This was the moment they'd prepared for. The scenario that kept her awake at night. Execute Armstrong protocol, she ordered. Her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. Authorization Chun Delta 77 Omega. Across the human fleet, weapon systems came online that had never been tested in combat. Humanity's final contingency. The ultimate deterrent, broadcast on all Krythian frequencies. Sarah commanded. Her image appeared on every screen on Krytia Prime. In every Krythian ship on every occupied world. High Chancellor Vexter, she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You have activated weapons designed to destroy our colonies. In 18 minutes, you will fire. But you should know what happens next. The display behind her shifted, showing technical readouts that made Krythian scientists gasp in horror. Humanity has placed automated weapon platforms in orbit around every major Krythian world. These platforms contain devices we call atmospheric converters. If any human colony is destroyed, these platforms will activate automatically. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Within 72 hours, every Krythian world will have an atmosphere toxic to your species. Within a week, billions will die. Within a month, your entire species will be functionally extinct. Vexter stared at the display in disbelief. Impossible. Our sensors would have detected. We've been placing them for 2 years. Sarah continued, using stealth technology developed specifically to bypass your detection grids. Technology gifted to us by species you conquered, who remembered every cruelty you inflicted. The Krythian Council chamber erupted in chaos. This is genocide. Council member Dex Rahl shouted, "You're threatening to exterminate our entire species." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Yes, exactly as you threatened to exterminate ours. The difference is, we're giving you a choice. Deactivate your planet killers and surrender, and humanity guarantees the safety of every Krythian civilian. Continue this war, and we'll ensure it ends with mutual annihilation." "You're bluffing," Vexter snarled. "Humans are supposed to be noble, compassionate. You wouldn't commit genocide." Marcus Webb appeared in a second view screen, his scarred face hard as stone. "We are compassionate," he said quietly. "That's why we're offering terms. But we're also the species that survived on a death world by refusing to give up. We're the species you tried to exterminate. Test if you want, Chancellor. Find out if we're bluffing." The silence stretched for long seconds. Then Dexrol moved. Faster than anyone expected, his clawed hand struck Vexter's throat. A precise blow that left the High Chancellor gasping on the floor. "I invoke emergency protocols," Dexrol announced, "on grounds of gross incompetence and existential threat to our species. I assume temporary leadership of the Krythian Council." Guards moved to intervene, but stopped as other council members stood to support. "Dexrol, deactivate the planet killers." Dexrol ordered, "An open communication with the humans. We will negotiate." The next 72 hours saw the most intense diplomatic activity the galaxy had ever witnessed. Humanity's terms were non-negotiable. Complete dissolution of the Krythian Empire. Independence for all subject species. War crimes, trials for those responsible for atrocities. An establishment of a new galactic order based on principles of equality and self-determination. You're destroying everything we built over 3,000 years. A Krythian negotiator protested President Okonkwo, representing humanity at the peace talks, met their eyes without flinching. "You built an empire on conquest and oppression. Yes, we're destroying it. What we're offering in return is a chance to build something better." The Terran Accords were signed 5 days later. The Krythian Empire ceased to exist. 47 species gained their independence. War crime tribunals began their long work of justice, and humanity emerged as a major galactic power. Not through conquest, but through the respect of those they'd fought beside 5 years after the war ended. Sarah Chung attended a memorial service on the rebuilt New Perth. 50,000 names were carved into black stone. Remembered forever. Was it worth it? Commander Harrison asked quietly. Standing beside her, Sarah thought about the cost millions dead. An entire generation scarred by war. The terrible things they'd done in the name of survival. "Ask them," she said. Gesturing to the crowd, humans mingled freely with Vorkai, with members of dozens of species that were now free. A young Vorkai child ran past, laughing, chasing a human child in a game that crossed species lines. "Yes," Sarah said finally. "It was worth it." Marcus Webb retired from active service, but found himself unable to stay away from military life. He became an instructor, teaching the new generation of soldiers from multiple species. "Why do humans fight so hard?" a student asked one day. A member of the Zelvian species, who'd never known war. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because we remember what it's like to be prey," he said finally. "Our ancestors were hunted across the plains of Earth. They survived by being too stubborn to die, too clever to catch, too determined to give up. That's what humans are. We're the species that looked at a hostile universe and said no. In the new Galactic Assembly, representatives from hundreds of species gathered for the first time as equals. The opening address was given by a human ambassador, but the closing words came from a Krytian representative, one of the younger generation who'd grown up during the war for 3,000 years. "My species believe we were the deadliest in the galaxy," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "We measured deadliness by strength, by weapons, by our ability to dominate. Then we met humanity." She paused, and the chamber fell silent. "Humans taught us that deadliness isn't about who can kill the most. It's about what you're willing to protect. Humans are deadly because their compassion has teeth, because their mercy has limits, because when you threaten what they love, you face something no empire can defeat: a united humanity that knows what it's fighting for." The chamber erupted in applause, not just from humans, but from dozens of species who'd learned the same lesson in a small apartment on Krytia Prime. Vexter watched the broadcast alone. He'd been spared execution, but not punishment. Forced to witness the Empire he'd led transform into something unrecognizable on the screen. The former High Chancellor Vex Roll spoke about reconciliation and the future. Vexter turned off the display. He'd spent years trying to understand how he'd lost. How primitives from the edge of space had destroyed an empire that had lasted millennia. The answer, he finally realized, was simple. He'd made one fundamental miscalculation. Assumed that deadliest meant strongest. Humans had proven that deadliest meant most determined, most adaptable, most willing to do whatever survival required. "Congratulations," he whispered to the empty room, repeating the words he'd spoken 3 years ago. "You have just declared war on the deadliest species in the galaxy." He'd been right about the deadliest species. He'd just been wrong about which one it was across human space. Colonies flourished. New settlements were founded in partnership with other species. Technology was shared freely. And the scars of war slowly healed children born after the war would grow up in a galaxy transformed, where species cooperated instead of conquering, where strength meant protecting the weak instead of exploiting them. Admiral Sarah Chun, now retired, stood on the observation deck of a civilian station and watched ships from 100 worlds go about their business in peaceful trade. "We did it," she said to no one in particular. "We actually did it." Behind her, a young officer approached human, but with the bearing of someone who'd never known war. "Admiral Chun, I wanted to thank you. My parents named me after you. Sarah Marcus Chunweb." Sarah smiled at the combination of names, her own. Marcus's a legacy,